Welcome back to University English 2, The Skills. Today we're looking at Unit 7, entitled The Art of Rhetoric. And this is all about preparing and delivering an effective speech. We'll begin with an introduction, and then we'll look at the 5 canons of rhetoric, followed by the SPAM model. And then we'll be looking at the canons in order, starting with Invention, where we'll be looking at topic selection, the selection of your idea, brainstorming, and research. This will be followed by arrangement, where we'll be taking a look at an outline of a speech. And then we'll be looking in more detail at the parts of a speech itself. The introduction, which includes the hook, some background, a thesis statement, and we'll be having a look at an example. We'll be then taking a look at the body sections, starting with markers, and then the structure of your body section, some stylistic devices which can be used, followed by an example. And then we'll be taking a look at a conclusion by way of an example primarily. The final canons, memory and delivery, will be looked at towards the end, in addition to some tools and how we can use tools when we're giving speeches, followed by a summary. Speech is power. Speech is to persuade, to convert, to compel. It is to bring another out of his bad sense into your good sense. So said Ralph Waldo Emerson in Letters and Social Aims in 1876. Now, the act of giving a speech to a group of people is what public speaking is. Now, this includes a variety of different speeches performed on your own, solo speeches in front of large audiences, and you might be quite familiar with these when they're regularly made by politicians, for example. But it also includes less formal, smaller events, such as a best man speech at a wedding. Understand that public speaking on topics of academic, professional, or personal interest is very, very common in classrooms, in university, for example, and in offices at the workplace all over the world. And more typically, these will take the form of what are known as presentations. One of the core public speaking skills, that of being able to create persuasive arguments, is actually so highly prized that students often practice it through competitive debates. And these debates are often used to incubate the next generation's political class. Now, in the classical world, the ancient Greeks defined public speaking as an art, that being the art of rhetoric. And Aristotle described this art as the faculty of observing, in any given case, the available means of persuasion, all the way back in 350 BC. Now, mastering this art, the art of rhetoric and the power to persuade people, is important not only in a political context, but it's very, very important in any organization where there is a need to inform people, to persuade people, or to entertain people. Now, it's not very surprising as a result that actually this skill is closely related to the skill of leadership. Many masters of public speaking have been leaders of one sort or another. Leaders at school, at university, in the workplace, think managers, for example, or on the national or international stage. Let's take a look then at the classical model. Now, the classical rhetorical model focuses on 5 particular canons. And by canons here, we don't actually mean the big gun kind of canons. We mean learning, canons of learning. And these would be inventio or invention, dispositio or arrangement, elocutio or style, memoria or memory, and actio or delivery. Now, invention really involves developing your thesis and the arguments with which you are going to support this thesis. Arrangement is organizing your speech in a way that makes sense, in a coherent way. Style involves drafting or writing your speech using appropriate techniques which are good for public speaking. Memory is memorizing or committing the speech to your memory, and then delivery is effectively giving the speech itself. Now, this classical structure for preparing speeches has actually changed very little over time. And if it is followed correctly, it will generate consistently good speeches with consistently good time management. Now, before we actually go about preparing a speech, there is some thought that should be given to aspects which might actually affect the choices which we are going to make during the speech preparation stage. Now, one method of doing this preparation before the preparation is through the spam process. And during this process, we want to ask ourselves a number of questions about the situation with which we are going to find ourselves in this speech. Now, spam helps us to remember what we need to ask about, but the first part of spam would be the situation. And here the questions you might want to ask yourself first would be, where will you give the speech? So the speech may be given in an auditorium, for example. Maybe it will be given in a wedding hall or any number of possible locations. And all of these could actually affect how you should give your speech. You should also ask, when will you be giving the speech? In particular, what is going to be happening before and after your speech? Perhaps there are other speakers and you are just one amongst many speakers. Perhaps the audience might be tired, for example. It may also be early in the morning, or it might be after lunch. Early in the morning, people are going to be a little groggy, and after lunch, they might be a little sleepy after eating a meal. It could be in the evening, meaning, again, it all depends on how the audience is going to be feeling. Are they feeling fresh? Are they quite grouchy and moody? Are they hungry? Or perhaps are they sleepy? You also want to ask yourself, will you have any tools available to you? And these include things like teleprompters, which are actually cameras, which then will have the speech that you are reading, and you will be then reading the speech being actually projected onto the camera so that you can look straight at the camera. You could have podiums, which is where you stand up on a raised platform, or a lectern where you can put your papers while you give your speech. You might have a computer available to you, projectors, any other variety of presentation tools, sound equipment, and so on. Now, these will all affect how you actually choose to deliver your speech itself. Finally, you want to ask yourself, what type of speech are you giving? It might be a formal speech, such as you will see with politicians, in which case it will likely be at a podium. It might be a presentation in front of co-workers or classmates. It may also be an informal speech, which would be given in a more relaxed environment, or perhaps it's a debate where you're going to be giving short miniature or mini speeches, which will be followed by rebuttals or people arguing against the points that you have given. Now for the P in spam, we're looking at purpose. And you want to ask, what do you, as the speaker, intend to achieve with your speech? Perhaps you intend a well-wishing speech. This kind of speech will congratulate somebody, perhaps for a promotion, maybe it's at a wedding, a birthday, maybe you're welcoming someone into your group, such as a new co-worker. All of these really are intended to boost confidence or to make somebody feel valued. Perhaps you'll be giving an informative speech. And this is the classical kind of speech that you would see at university, with university lecturers giving you information, aimed to educate the audience about the topic. And there are actually two kinds of informative speech. One where an expert is giving a speech to laymen who are non-experts, or where an expert is giving a speech to other experts. Note that you should be an expert if you're giving an informative speech, so you need to know really what you're talking about. Perhaps it's a persuasive speech as well, where you're trying to convince the audience to accept a controversial point of view, one point of view which not everybody accepts, and you need to persuade them to agree with you. Maybe you're making a call to arms, which is trying to inspire the audience to take action of some kind, to do something. And it could also be a combined speech, which might merge any of these types. You might start by giving information, then try to persuade, and then try to get the audience to do something. And in relation to your audience, you really do need to think and know about your audience. So ask yourself, what do you know about your audience? How many people are going to be there? How old are they likely to be? What is their gender likely to be? How interested are they in actually being there? Are they forced to be there, or have they volunteered to come? How much do they know? And this is a very important one. How much do they know about your likely topic? And this will relate later to how detailed you want to go in your speech itself to give the information. Do they consider you to be a peer, which means on the same level? For example, a student would be a peer with another student, but a professor is not a peer with a student. Or do they consider you to be an outsider, not a member of the group? Now, all of these questions will shed light on what the audience's majority and minority views are likely to be, and also whether they are going to be friendly or hostile towards you. And it will therefore indicate how you should tailor your speech to better suit your audience. And then finally, the last part of the SPAM model is method. How are you going to prepare and give your speech? Now, at this point, you should already have considered the SPA part of SPAM, the situation, the purpose, and the audience. And now you can start to consider how you should best approach the speech. What type of speech are you going to give, and what is its purpose? How can you best achieve that purpose in the situation you will find yourself in? Should you be very serious, or maybe should you be making some jokes, for example? What should you wear? Should you be wearing a suit or a dress, or should you actually be dressing much more casually? Should you use tools? If so, which tools? If not, then you will know at this stage. Now, having considered the SPAM model, you can begin the process of invention. And you want to start really this by defining your thesis. The thesis will have two key elements to it. The first being the topic, that which you are talking about, and the next being the controlling idea, or that which you wish to say about the topic. Now, sometimes the scope of choice for the topic might be limited. For example, your instructor might tell you to give a speech related to a specific field of study or a specific field of work. But remember that within these broader categories, there are many narrower ones, which actually does give you a great deal of liberty to select your more specific topic. For example, if your teacher asks you to prepare a speech about pets, well, you clearly still have a choice of which type of pet. You can still give a speech about a cat, a dog, a lizard even. Now, when selecting a topic, an important consideration is going to be how much time do you have available. Now, often when you're giving speeches, you will be told you have 10 minutes, you have 20 minutes, you have 5 minutes. Now, if your topic is too broad, that means too wide, then you will be unable to fully cover that topic in the time that you have. But if your topic is too narrow, then you will not have enough to talk about. So a lot of your topic selection should really depend on how much time you have available to you. In addition, you should consider whether your topic is appropriate for your audience. Remember to think about the demographics of your audience and try to select a topic which is likely of interest to them, one which is not too simple, but also not too complicated for them to understand. Finally, it's never good enough simply to have a topic. You need to have something that you want to say about your topic, your point of view, or your main argument about that particular topic. This is the controlling idea, and it's this controlling idea which is actually going to be the main focus of your speech. Without a controlling idea, your speech can often appear to be disjointed or just rambling, talking about random things rather than having any coherence. So it will lack in coherence. Now, in addition, the controlling idea helps you to further narrow your speech by making its scope more specific. So we're going to illustrate all of this through actually an example. Let's imagine that your instructor, your teacher or professor tells you to create a speech about your major. And let's say that your major is music. Well, you could just choose music as your topic. However, if you are told that your speech should be between 5 or 10 minutes in length, then actually, if you choose a topic of music, really, this could be hours and hours in length. In fact, in your own major, you are likely to be taking several different courses about different aspects of music, which would mean that we're really talking about hundreds of hours of possible content. So that would be too broad for the time that you have. Let's try to narrow it down then. Korean music. Well, this could still include modern Korean music and various genres of modern Korean music in addition to classical music, so still too broad. We could try and narrow it down further to modern Korean music, but once again, there are many different genres, so this would be quite broad for a 5 to 10 minute speech. Let's narrow it down further. Maybe we can talk about K-pop singers. Most K-pop singers, and the topic here would then be K-pop singers, and let's try now to add an idea, a controlling idea, what we want to actually say. Most K-pop singers are manufactured. Now, that would likely be suitable for a speech of between 5 and 10 minutes in length, because you are going to argue that K-pop singers are like an industry. However, if you try to narrow it down a little bit further and chose a topic of BTS, for example, and your main idea or your controlling idea is then going to be simply that they are handsome, then this might be a little bit short for a 5 to 10 minute speech, because you're not really going to have enough to say to last that particular length of time. So in this case, then, let's go ahead and choose K-pop singers as our topic, and our argument is going to be that most of them are manufactured. It is true to say that all good speeches will be written first. So we are going to be following the writing process when we want to prepare a speech. And remember that part of the writing process is brainstorming, part of the pre-writing. Brainstorming, in this case, would probably start by thinking about selecting your topic and your controlling idea. Now, there are 3 basic methods which are used for brainstorming. And the first is making a list, the next is free writing, and the last is mind mapping. Now, any or all of these methods can be used in either group or individual projects or speeches which you wish to employ. Let's take a look at what these actually are. So making a list simply involves writing down the possibilities in a list, perhaps with some notes next to each on your thoughts for topics, for controlling ideas, for support that might be suitable for them, and you might make notes on the suitability of your selections. Free writing is performed by simply writing down anything which comes into your head about the broader topic or the question which you have been assigned, without worrying about the spelling or the grammar. You simply want the writing to flow straight from your mind onto the paper, and then after you've written down anything which comes into your head about that topic, you can then review and select appropriate ideas, appropriate topics from your free writing. Mind mapping is performed by connecting bubbles of related ideas, starting with a broader topic or question as a central bubble, and then connecting bubbles with relationships where they are connected in some way. Now, this method is good for establishing supporting points or supporting arguments for your controlling idea. Now, at this stage, you may also need to do some research in order to find points or arguments which are going to support your controlling idea. Now, these days, it's a lot easier than when I was in school because there was no internet at that time. But now we have the internet, and this makes it very, very easy for us to do research. Remember, though, that when you are researching, you want to make sure that your sources are credible. Just as a reminder, credibility means that the source should be believable, written by experts in that particular field, or by reliable organizations known for producing accurate reports or accurate data. Keep a record of your sources. Even though you're going to be speaking your speech, you may want to actually mention your sources in your speech because they will strengthen your arguments. If you are referencing somebody orally, it can very much strengthen your supporting arguments because a lot of what you reference will have much more credibility than you do as an individual speaker. Now, in the end, the method of brainstorming is not important, really. So just choose whichever method that you like, or use a variety of methods in conjunction. But what is important is that before you actually start the writing of your speech, you should actually have a very good idea of what is going to go in your speech already. You should know what your topic is going to be, what your controlling idea is going to be, what the main supporting arguments are going to be, and then how you're going to support those particular supporting arguments. Let's move on to the next part of the classical model, which is arrangement. At this stage, you should now have a good idea of what the content of your speech is going to be. The next step is to arrange it in an appropriate way. Now, the most common method of arranging or organizing a speech is to create an outline. Now, outlines will typically use Roman numerals and letters in addition to cardinal numbers as methods of ordering different parts of the speech. Now, in order to create an outline, it is actually necessary to know what the structure of a speech is before you can actually go ahead and create an outline. Now, all speeches will have a clear beginning and a middle and an end. The beginning is known as the introduction. The middle is called the body and will consist of several sections depending on the length of the speech. And the end is referred to as the conclusion. Now, this basic structure is the same as we will see in academic writing, such as in essays. So the structure is really quite the same as you will see in an essay. However, remember that even though a good speech will be written first, the language which you use in your speech should be aimed at it being spoken. Let's take a look then at an outline of what could be a speech or an essay. So first we would have our introduction, and this will be broken into several parts. The first part would likely be what we call a hook. Now, a hook is intended to gain the audience's attention and to provoke interest in what you're going to say. Note that you should use a hook at the beginning or near the beginning of your introduction to immediately get the audience's attention, but you can also use hooks throughout your speech in order to regain the audience's attention when they start to perhaps get bored. This will typically be followed by background information. Now, this is intended to make the audience aware of the basics of the topic that you are going to discuss. And the final part of your introduction would be your thesis statement. Now, a good thesis statement will have three key elements. The topic, that is, what you're going to talk about. The controlling idea, that means what you want to say about this topic, your thoughts on the topic, and then any highlights. Highlights being glimpses or an easy way for the audience to see how you are actually going to support your controlling idea. And these will then link directly with each of the body sections within your speech. Now remember that this structure is also the same structure for an essay. So this is how you would write an essay as well. The only difference being that the language that you're using should be aimed at spoken language if it's a speech, but for an essay, you better be very careful because the written language is going to be quite difficult for them to understand unless you're using very precise words and very precise grammar. Now, for the body sections of your speech, there will be several, and you want to start with a marker. Now, this might be slightly different from an essay. It is not essential to have a marker in an essay because you should be using paragraphing. And with the paragraphs, the reader will be able to tell when you are moving on to the next part of your essay, when you're moving on to the next body section or from the introduction to the body section. But in a speech, the audience is not reading, so they will not have any advantage of seeing the paragraphs and knowing when you are changing subtopics or when you're changing or moving on to a new part. And that's why you should be using markers, otherwise known as speech transitions. And they can be as simple as words like first, next, and so on, just to allow the audience to understand that you're moving to another part of your speech. Now, in an essay, you will probably begin with a topic sentence, and this should be immediately after your marker, the next thing in your speech. The topic sentence, like with an academic paragraph, will contain a topic and the main idea for this particular body section. And this topic and main idea should link directly to one of the highlights in your thesis statement. This would then be followed by supporting sentences, sentences which go to support your main idea for this particular body section. And then finally, you should end with a concluding sentence. And this sentence will offer a final thought on the main idea discussed in the body section, and itself will act as a further marker telling the audience that you're about to move on to the next section. Now you would have, depending on the length of your speech or the length of your essay, several of these body sections, several of these body paragraphs or body sections in a speech, and this would end with one section, the final conclusion at the end. Now in your conclusion, you want to do a lot of paraphrasing. Once again, paraphrasing is saying something again using different words. And in this case, you're going to paraphrase your thesis statement, restate your thesis. Also, you can paraphrase the strongest points from your body sections as well. And then you can end with some final thoughts about your chosen thesis. Let's take a look in a little bit more detail. So beginning with the introduction, let's look at the hook and some stylistic options which can be used for it. So once again, a hook should be at the beginning or near the beginning of your introduction. Its purpose is to get the audience's attention so that they are listening to you. Now, several hooks can be used. You don't need to just use one. You can use several hooks in the introduction. And once again, you can use hooks throughout your speech in order to get the audience's attention back. Now, a lot of people struggle with the creation of a good hook. How do you actually get the audience's attention? Now, there are a number of common techniques which are used in order to get the audience's attention. And any of you who have watched TED Talks, then you would recognize some of these actually being used in those talks. Let's take a look. So the first here is story time. And you can start with a real story which is related to your topic and controlling idea, which is related to your thesis. And all of these should be related to your thesis in some way. Shock and awe. Use surprising facts, such as surprising statistics, which would highlight your thesis. Let's imagine. Use the audience's imagination. So you can start by saying, for example, imagine you are on an island. Of course, what you're getting them to imagine should once again be related to your topic and main idea. Joke. Everybody loves jokes. Tell a joke which is relevant for your thesis. Lights, camera, action. Immediately start by giving a plan of action. For example, we can reduce the use of fossil fuels. Interact. Ask the audience questions which they are going to answer. So you're literally directly asking members of the audience questions, getting their answers to the questions, trying to get them to consider or think about your particular topic. And another way of doing this is rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions are questions which you will answer yourself, or which nobody is going to answer. Essentially, you're just asking a question, but not of a particular member of the audience, and then going on perhaps to state the answer, or perhaps not to state it quite yet. Another method is a quotation. And when you're using a quotation, this should probably be a famous person or somebody who is well renowned in relation to your speech. So you might start, for example, by saying John F. Kennedy once said, and then quote what he said. The next is a sensory blitz. And these will use audios, visuals, and props to try to grab the audience's attention. You might have seen this being done in certain kinds of speeches. For example, an MC might come on stage with lots of music blaring, lots of sound, in order to get everyone's attention. And the final method is the fearmonger. People pay attention when they are afraid. So you can prey on the audience's fears about things in relation to the topic. Now, after your hook, you should have some background information. And this would be general information about the topic you want to discuss. Now, typically, we use a funnel introduction where we will have several sentences starting with very broad background information, slowly narrowing down towards background more closely related to your particular thesis. Take care once again here to gauge or assess the level of knowledge of your audience quite well. Don't tell them things that they already know because they will get bored, and don't tell them very specific things which they cannot possibly understand, because by going over their heads in that way, they will just simply become confused and lose interest. Additionally, note that sometimes parts of the background information itself may actually serve as hooks. You might have some startling information, for example, which is also being background information, but also actually trying to get the audience's attention as well. Now, the final part of your introduction would be your thesis statement. Now, this should have your specific topic, your narrowed topic, and your controlling idea, what actually you want to say about your topic. A good thesis will also contain highlights, and these are the ways in which you're going to support your controlling idea. It should not be a surprise to the audience, your arguments, your main arguments. They should have already been told the direction that you are going in. You want to lead your audience in a particular direction. You don't want them to be blundering around blind and walking into walls. Now, each highlight will then link directly to each of the body sections in your speech. So, for example, if you have three main arguments which go to support your main idea, your controlling idea, then actually the first argument will link, the first highlight will link with body section 1, and the second highlight will link with body section 2, and the third highlight will link with body section 3. The thesis statement is the most important part of your speech or your essay if you're preparing an essay, because this is what will control the entire speech or the entire essay and what gives it coherence and what gives it unity, in that it will link everything together. It acts as the backbone or the spine of your speech. Now, it can be very difficult to understand all of this theory unless we actually look at an example. So let's look at an example of a speech's introduction here. In 2020, the K-pop industry managed to set another record, with the Bulletproof Scout Boys, more commonly known as BTS, managing to attract 101.1 billion views of its new song, Dynamite, within just 24 hours of its release. Consider that number for a moment. There are only 8 billion people on this planet, but within a few hours, a BTS song was watched over 100 billion times. The money involved is also mind-boggling. The K-pop industry brought in revenues of over 7.1 trillion Korean won, or $6.2 billion in 2019. By contrast, the United Kingdom, a leading player in the music world, managed a mere $1 billion. Let's take a look. Now, this is not the entire part yet of the introduction. We will continue it, but let's take a look at what we've got so far. So we start with a little bit of background information, talking about the K-pop industry and its success. We do have hooks in here as well. For example, the 101.1 billion views is intended as shock and awe, to shock the audience into giving you their attention. We also have another hook, let's imagine, where we say, consider that number for a moment, asking the audience to think about it. And then we have some more background information about the revenues of the K-pop industry, talking about how much money actually they're making. And by stating the actual money, we are putting another hook in here as well, shock and awe, 7.1 trillion Korean won, 6.2 billion US dollars. So here actually we have three hooks placed quite liberally within the first part of the introduction here, where we are giving some background information about the K-pop industry, which, as you can imagine, is actually going to be the topic for this particular speech. Note also that we have a marker here. We'll talk a little bit more about these markers, but this is a contrasting marker, which is contrasting the K-pop industry with that of the United Kingdom. Let's take a look then at the last part of this introduction. Unsurprisingly, many observers around the world have been paying close attention to the K-pop phenomenon and asking themselves the crucial question, what is the key to K-pop's success? The answer is that the K-pop dish is so very tasty because it is a manufacturing process involving three key ingredients: the rigorous training of band members, strong governmental backing, and the merger of different sounds from around the world. Okay, and that is the end then of this particular introduction. So let's take a look. We're going to have a marker here which is going to show cause and effect with the word unsurprisingly, and then it goes on to have cause and effect. We've also got a fourth hook now. This is a rhetorical question. I'm asking this question, but I am then going on to answer the question myself. And in answering the question, I am in fact giving my thesis statement. And for the thesis statement, the topic is K-pop. And the controlling idea is that it is successful because it treats music as an industry. I'm also including my highlights. These are going to form the main body sections of my speech. These are the three main ways I'm going to argue that this is the case. And the first is about the training of the band members, how difficult and rigorous it is. The second is that the government, the Korean government, helps this industry out quite a lot. And then the last is that the sounds itself have been tailored to a global appeal. They have merged the sounds of many different places from around the world in order to create this unique sound, which is K-pop. Let's take a look now at the body sections of your speech. Now, the body sections are the bulk of your speech. It's the main content. You're going to have several sections here, which will be the arguments, the core arguments on how you're going to support your controlling idea in your thesis. Now, you want to begin each of these body sections with markers or speech transitions. These are being used once again to help the audience keep track of exactly where you are in the speech. So they are quite an important part of body sections for speeches in particular. For essays, they're not that necessary, but for speeches, they are very necessary. Now, markers may be whole sentences or clauses with a subject and a predicate. They may be sequencing adverbs or other forms of adverbials, words or phrases, such as prepositional phrases, which are acting in the same way as adverbs do. Let's take a look at some examples for the beginning of different sections. So if you are moving from your introduction to your first body section, then you might start by saying something like, let's begin by looking at, or to get started, let's examine. Let's get started talking about, let's start with, or first, let's see why. All of those, again, telling the audience that you are now moving to the first body section. Now, if you're moving from one body section to another body section, you might use something like, next, I would like to focus on, or secondly, if it's the second body section. The third reason is for the third body section. Let's now take a look at, to show them that you're changing topic again here, and let's turn our attention to show a change in topic. Now, if you are going from your final body section to your conclusion, you might begin your conclusion with something like, in summary, or in conclusion, or something like, I would like to finish up by saying, or let's bring this tale to a close, or I would like to wrap up with a few words. All of these helping the audience to know where you are in the speech. Now, transitional markers can also be used within all sections of the speech itself, but they're particularly useful in supporting arguments that are being made in body sections. Now, these markers can be used to simply improve the flow of your speech, but they act in a similar way. They are generally adverbials, which will go at the beginning of sentences. Note that sequencing adverbs usually have a comma after them when you're writing. So if you're writing an essay, they should have a comma, generally speaking. But in a speech, a comma represents a pause. So perhaps you should pause in speech after you introduce something with one of these transitional markers. So if you want to say that the next argument is a similar argument to one you've already made, you might use a word to begin like likewise, or similarly, or this is just like, or in a similar way. If you have a contrasting idea, you might begin the next part with however, conversely, on the other hand, or despite this. To show cause to effect, you might say, therefore, as a result, consequently, or this leads to. To just add additional information, you may say, also, moreover, in addition, furthermore. And if you're detailing a process of steps, you might be using words like next, then, the first step is to, the last thing to do is to. Now, these can be used to improve the fluency and to help the audience or the reader, if it's an essay, to understand what your type of argument is that you're about to follow. Is it similar? Is it contrasting? Are you showing cause and effect? Are you adding additional support? Are you detailing a process in the stages in which they should occur? Now, otherwise, your structure in your body sections is exactly the same as that we have seen already in Unit 2's Academia for an academic paragraph. In short, your initial marker for the body section would be followed by your topic sentence for that body section, which should link again directly with one of your highlights. Now, this topic sentence contains its own topic and its own main idea for this body section. Following your topic sentence, you should posit supporting sentences which go on then to support the main idea for this particular body section. Now, after you've supported your main idea, you should end with a concluding sentence. This is important because it helps the audience to know that you're about to move on to another section. So in effect, it's acting as a further transitional marker for your audience. In an essay, if you have a short body section, you might omit the concluding sentence or simply paraphrase your topic sentence. But in essays, still concluding sentences are recommended for body sections in most cases. Now, sometimes more than one concluding sentence can be used, but usually not. Usually you'll just choose one concluding sentence. It's not necessary to have several of them. Finally, then, there are a number of stylistic devices which work particularly well in speeches, and some of these are good for writing as well, but the ones that we're looking at here are particularly good for speeches. Now, these can actually be used in any section, but once again, the body forms the main bulk of your speech, so they will feature most prominently within the bulk or the body section of your speech itself. Let's take a look at some of these. So the first method is alliteration. This is the repetition of a sound in the first syllable of each phrase. And we'll do this through some quotations. So first we have Barack Obama, who in 2009 said, "They are part of the finest fighting force that the world has ever known. They have served tour after tour of duty in distant, different, and difficult places." So notice the repetition of finest fighting force, and d for distant, different, and difficult. So alliteration, repetition of a sound in that first syllable. The next is anadiplosis. And this is where the last word or phrase is repeated to begin the next. And here we're going to quote from a movie, that movie being Star Wars, Episode 1. And Frank Oz was the actor, so acting as Yoda. This was back in 1999. And Yoda said, "Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering." So notice here, we're ending the first sentence with anger and beginning the next with anger. Ending that with hate, beginning the next with hate. This kind of repetition is called anadiplosis. The next is anti-metabol. And this is the repetition of words or phrases in successive clauses, but in reverse order. And this is a quotation from the famous economist Milton Friedman all the way back in 1955, who very aptly said, "Not all schooling is education, nor all education schooling." So notice that schooling and education have been swapped in the second phrase here. This is called anti-metabol. Antithesis. Now this is where a word, phrase, or sentence opposes the original proposition. And here we're actually going to look at a quotation from Neil Armstrong when he famously walked on the moon for the first time. And this was back in 1969. Now, there is actually a debate about this quotation. Most people remember this quotation as "That's one small step for man." But actually, Armstrong said, he actually said, "That's one small step for a man," but the seems to have been omitted, or it was not quite recorded well in the recording. But let's read it. "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." So notice how a small step becomes a giant leap. So giant leap is very much different from the small step. So it's in quite opposition to the original proposition of the small step. This is antithesis. Asyndeton. Now this is the omission of conjunctions such as and or but. Now this is done to help increase the pace or the speed of the speech, making it more passionate, and to highlight a specific area. And here we have a quotation from Abraham Lincoln all the way back in 1863. "And that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." Notice there are no conjunctions being used here. And the next is diacope. Now this is a repeated word or phrase split up by other words, typically used to express a strong emotion. And this is from William Shakespeare's play Othello, which was originally written somewhere around circa 1603. "Put out the light, and then put out the light." So notice how we're saying the same thing, or he was saying the same thing again, but actually what was intended and what was meant here was that a person was going to die. So they were saying, "Put out the light, turn off the light, and then turn his lights off." Put out his light. And that was what was intended. So it's being used here to emphasize the emotion which is being felt by the people involved. Now the next stylistic device we have is litotes. And this is a double negative, denying an opposite idea, and it's often being used quite ironically. And here we have a quotation from Jonathan Swift in A Tale of a Tub in 1704. And it goes to say, "I am not unaware." So notice that that is a double negative. He could just say, "I am aware," but actually he's saying, "I am not unaware," to be ironic. "I am not unaware how the productions of the Grub Street Brotherhood have of late years fallen under many prejudices." And then last with these stylistic devices, let's end up with metaphor and simile. Now, a metaphor is an analogy, which is a story which compares one thing or idea with another, which is not quite like it, but while suggesting a similarity between the two. That's what an analogy is. Now, the difference between a metaphor and a simile being a comparison between two unlike things, which is exactly what a metaphor is, but a simile uses words as or like. A metaphor doesn't use as or like. Otherwise, they function in the same way. So let's have a look for a metaphor to the late Senator John McCain, who in 2008 said, homeowners are the innocent bystanders in a drive-by shooting by Wall Street and Washington. So comparing Wall Street and Washington, which are the financial center and the political center of the United States, with gangsters who would perform a drive-by shooting, it's dissimilar, but an analogy is being made here that perhaps they are not that dissimilar. For the simile, let's look at Martin Luther King Jr. in 1955, who said, "We will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream." Now, obviously, justice is not a water and righteousness is not a stream, but they are being compared using the words like in this case, which makes it, therefore, a simile. All of these stylistic devices can very much improve the quality of your speeches, and they can also be used in writing in many instances as well, but they are particularly effective for speeches. Now, let's take a look at an example of a body section, because it's quite difficult to understand unless we get an example. First, let's see just how intensive the training for K-pop bands is. The decision to be a K-pop wannabe is made in the early years of a child's life, often by their parents. They will be sent to a number of academies or hagwons, which teach them to sing, dance, and play musical instruments. If they show promise, from around age 10, they will typically be sent to auditions hosted by big music agencies such as YG, JYP, or SM Entertainment. Prospects can be sent to dozens of these, often live or online events, with success at one, meaning they become a trainee. This is no small feat. Blackpink's Lisa, for example, was the only trainee selected in YG's audition in Thailand. Now, this is just the first part of this body section, but let's break it down or analyze it. And first is a good word to use here, because we begin with a transition first, a marker. And it's as simple as that. It's just a one-word marker showing the audience or telling the audience that I'm moving from the introduction to the first body section. Then we have the topic sentence, and the topic sentence contains the topic and the main idea. The topic is training for K-pop bands, and the main idea is that it is rigorous, it is difficult. And if you remember the introduction, this links directly with the first highlight in our introduction. So it will be no surprise to the audience that I'm going to start with this particular topic. Now, how do we support this main idea? With a lot of details. We talk about a prospective trainee's early life, how they are sent to many different hagwons. We give details about the different music agencies that they might actually audition at, and we give further details that maybe if they're successful, then they can become a trainee only at this stage. Now, we also support then with an example, that being the example of Blackpink's Lisa being the only one who was selected at YG's audition in Thailand. Let's take a look then at the second part of this first body section. Then comes the real training. Hours and hours of it every day, usually starting in the early morning with a break for school and then resuming in the evening. Training includes vocal lessons, dance lessons, and music lessons, and is often tailored to the role in the band which has been given to the trainee. These lessons go on for years. Big Bang's G-Dragon spent 11 years in training, 5 with SM and 6 with YG. On top of this regime, trainees must maintain their public image, maintain a certain weight, and even maintain a distance from personal relationships. Then, and only then, do these aspiring trainees get a crack at being an actual K-pop idol. As you can see, the training for a K-pop idol is not for the faint-hearted. Okay, so at the beginning, we have a marker here showing a process of steps, the steps that have to be taken in order for the candidate to achieve their goal of becoming a K-pop idol, a simple marker like then in this case. We continue with some details in support of our main idea here, showing how difficult it is. They have to wake up in the early mornings and they go to school, and then they continue in the evenings as well. They take lots of different types of lessons, vocal, dance, and music lessons as well. And we have an example as well with Big Bang's G-Dragon and how long he actually spent in training. And then we support with some more details about how they have to keep a public image, a good weight, and not get into any personal relationships. Note that we are using diacope here, repeating the word maintain, maintain, and maintain. And we're also using asyndeton as well in the last part there before even. There's no conjunction in order to just continue as speedily as possible. We also have another marker here showing process steps, again using then, a simple word, but using it twice, which is diacope. The second to last sentence here is actually a concluding sentence. We're using 2 in this case. And this is a prediction talking about the future. If they do all this, it's possible for them to actually become a K-pop idol. They get just a chance at becoming one. And then we have a second concluding sentence, which is a restatement. It is the paraphrased topic sentence, which I'm simply saying in different words. And that is how you construct a body section for your speech. Now, you would have several body sections. In this speech example, as you can see from the highlights, there would have been 3 body sections. I'll only show you one example to save on time. And after you have those 3 body sections, you would move then to the last part of your speech, or if you're writing an essay, the last part of your essay, that being your conclusion. Now, the first thing you want to do here is to paraphrase your thesis statement. So you say it again using different words. Now, you can do this in one sentence, or you can do it in more than one sentence, but make sure that you're also paraphrasing your highlights, which would be then your topic sentences for your body sections as well. You can also paraphrase the strongest points from your speech if you wish to do so. It really depends on the length of your conclusion. If you're a little bit short, if it's a little bit too short, you can add in some strongest points as well. Finally, you should offer some final thoughts, and there are several ways in which you can offer some final thoughts. Some of them are similar to the ways that you could write a concluding sentence. Some of them are a little bit different. So for a prediction, you can predict the future related to your thesis. You could make a recommendation, which is to suggest actions that the audience can or should take. You can also loop back to your hook And here, if you asked a rhetorical question in your introduction, or you made a quotation in your introduction, you can now comment on that rhetorical question which went unanswered, or you can comment on the quotation which you have yet to comment on. And finally, you can just give your opinion on the thesis topic that you have discussed. You can do one or more than one of these, again, depending on how long you want your conclusion to be, depending on how much time really you have or don't have. Let's take a look at an example of the conclusion for the speech which we were looking at. In summary, K-pop's achievements are not the result of a fluke. Instead, they are the product of arduous selection and training spanning many years, combined with generous financial and regulatory support provided to the industry from the highest levels of government. And let's not forget the talent of the musicians and their agencies in identifying global sounds and combining them to create unique styles. Styles by the people of the world, marketed to the people of the world. For those of you who think this is a one-time special, think again. K-pop is here to stay, and before you know it, your kids will be listening to it, if they are not already. So, better get on board, remain relevant, turn on YouTube, listen to the sounds of the future. Let's break this down. So we have a marker showing that we're moving from the final body section to the conclusion, as simple as in summary in this case. And then we are paraphrasing our thesis statement straight away. We are using other markers here. This is a contrast marker just to help with the fluidity or fluency of what we're saying. And then we are paraphrasing our first highlight, which wasn't included in the first paraphrase of the thesis. And we are also paraphrasing our second highlight or our second topic sentence from that second body section. And we have an additional marker here, something as simple as and here works well in speech. Might not work so well in writing, but certainly and works well in speech. And then we are paraphrasing our third highlight as well. We're also paraphrasing a strong point, one of the strongest points that we made in the combination of these global styles. We're using anadiplosis here, where we are ending and then ending one statement with styles and then beginning the next with styles. And we're also using diacope as well by repeating the people of the world and the people of the world here once again. We're ending up with some final thoughts. The first here is a prediction, saying that, well, everyone's going to be listening to this soon. It's not something which is going to go away. So is acting as a cause to effect marker, which is also giving us then our final thought, which is a recommendation. You should go ahead and join in the fandom of this phenomenon. And we're also using, finally, a syndeton again here, ending without a conjunction to the final part of our speech. And that is how you can go about creating a good conclusion. Now, remember that this should all have been written before you're actually going to give the speech. And in order to give the speech well, you need to actually memorize it. So once you have finished your first draft of the speech, you can begin the process of memorization. And this process is recommended for how you can go about these final stages of preparing for your speech. First, you want to review this first draft and edit it where necessary. So this would be the editing in the writing process. And then read aloud your second draft. And you can use easily cell phones to time yourself and even to look at yourself as you're trying to give the speech in order to check your use of body language and vocal variety. Importantly, though, here, time your speech, because all speeches really have time limits, unless it's an exceptional speech and you don't have one. And then you want to add or remove parts of your speech in order to get it for the right time, in order to make it the right length. Again, read aloud your third draft now, timing again, making sure that it is in the right time. Make any final edits or final adjustments to your speech. And then you want to practice. This is now your fourth draft, really. And you want to practice, practice, practice until you feel that you know most of the content, and still until you don't have to actually read all of it from the script. Then you're in a position to reduce your script to bullet point forms on small cards. Now, these bullet points only serve to remind you of where you are during the speech. You should not, under any circumstances, be giving a speech reading from a full script, unless perhaps you're an important politician reading from a teleprompter and somebody else has prepared your script, but we're not going to go there really. Now note that PowerPoint presentations or similar presentation software actually serve as your small cards by reminding you where you are in your speech. So if you're giving a presentation and you're using PPTs, then those PPTs should be in bullet point form, meaning they should be there just to remind you of where you are in your speech, rather than to actually have the entire script of your speech on them from which you should be reading. Now, if you're using PPTs or other kinds of applications which do the same thing, then this is the point at which you should consider preparing those PPTs when you are going about reducing your speech to bullet point form. Now, if the speech is very important or you need to give it without any notes or any presentation software, then you need to continue practicing your speech until the bullet points are no longer needed and your speech is fully memorized. The last canon is delivery. Now, once your speech has been committed to memory, you can actually start working on your delivery. You've probably already started working on your delivery by recording yourself, and then you can assess your use of vocal variety and body language. If not, you want to be at the final stage making all of these recordings. Again, with your cell phone, it's quite easy. Make recordings and review them to see how you can actually improve your delivery. Now, here are some areas that you should focus on when it comes to delivery. So, eye contact. Now, ensure that you are looking into the eyes of members of the audience that make eye contact with you, and as many people as possible. So don't just look at one person. That person will start to feel a little bit intimidated after a while. You should be looking around the audience, trying to get eye contact with as many people as possible so that each of them feel that you are speaking to them personally. Expressions, particularly facial expressions. Remember that these convey many messages and many emotions, in particular, emotions that you might want the audience to feel. Remember that the audience and people in general tend to mirror feelings. So if somebody is sad and crying, you might feel sad and crying. It's called empathy. And we do have a lot of empathy, or at least most people do. So try to use your facial expressions to convey your feelings or the feelings that you want your audience to feel. Posture. Ensure that you're facing your audience. Don't give them your back. Don't look at your presentation screen and just turn your back to the audience. Don't have a timid or shy posture. but also don't have an aggressive stance unless actually the speech is aggressive in nature, in which case it might warrant it. For gestures, don't place your hands in your pockets. Don't have them dangling at your sides doing nothing either. Instead, try to use your hands to emphasize key points within your speech itself. And pay particular attention to your use of vocal variety. Use your voice effectively. Particularly, make sure that you're speaking with enough volume. In many cases, you shouldn't need a microphone to give a speech. You should be able to project your voice actually to the audience unless it's a huge auditorium. But if you're using a microphone, make sure that it's set at the right volume so everybody can hear you. Pay attention to your use of pace, how fast you're going. Remember, you can change the pace and speed up when you want people to give you more attention or to feel more passionate. Make sure you're using good intonation, not a monotone voice. Use pauses effectively to draw attention to things that you have said or are about to say. Now remember that your voice should actually tell the audience that you are interested and passionate about your chosen thesis. And if your voice doesn't indicate that passion, your audience will never feel that passion either. Now, it's worth noting that many speeches are given using tools such as podiums, which are raised stands where you will move to a higher level so the audience can see you. Lecterns, which you can see on the bottom right there, which are simply little tables that allow you to speak and perhaps have a little microphone, and microphones are common as well. Now, there are also other tools which make giving a speech easier, make it more exciting for the audience as well. But these should be used sparingly. Remember that you don't want the audience's attention to be taken away from you as the speaker. Instead, you want to use tools to aid you or assist you in giving your speech effectively. Now, the tools which are going to be available to you will very much depend on the type of speech that you're giving, whether these tools are practicable or possible in that situation, or permissible or allowed in that situation. So here are some examples of tools that you could use. Props. Now, props are models or real illustrations, and they serve to demonstrate a particular concept or particular design. So these are real things which might be brought in. For example, an architecture student might bring in a model of his own particular design for a building. Now, these are particularly good for artistic presentations to actually show the piece of art, because they require detailed visualizations. Handouts are simply sheets of paper which are related to your thesis in some way. They may perhaps indicate an outline for the speech, which might help the audience to know where they are in the speech as it progresses. So effectively helping them to understand when you're changing topics and so on. Now, they might also contain activities for the audience to do. And these might be suitable for longer speeches where you have more time. A teleprompter, I've mentioned this a couple of times. This is an expensive piece of equipment. It allows you to see the entire script of the speech in front of you while you are looking at a camera. It's really only practicable for very big budget, expensive presentations, and reduces the need for memorization. Now, the use of PowerPoint or similar kinds of applications or computer applications or programs is very common, especially in university and especially in the working world. This is one of the main ways in which we assist ourselves to give speeches, and these speeches could then be called presentations. Now, this kind of software like PowerPoint is often used in combination with a presentation tool. And a presentation tool will allow the presenter to move to the next slide while still staying mobile, meaning they can walk around, they can actually move around. Perhaps that allows them to talk to the audience more or to maneuver more around the room in order to try to keep the audience's attention rather than being stuck in one particular place. Often they are attached to a computer with a USB, and then you simply click a button and it allows you to move around. Another very useful tool for presentations is a laser pointer. They allow you to highlight certain points on the screen that you're talking about. Very useful tool. Now, when actually making your PPTs, there are a few guidelines which are worth noting. Use clear titles on each slide. Make sure that the titles on each slide are quite clear and about that particular slide's contents. Also, use bullet points of a large size and not entire scripts of a small size. So once again, your PPTs should be bullet points. They should not really be the entire contents of your speech. Use appropriate colors. Dark text on light background or light text on dark background. If you use dark on dark or light on light, the audience won't be able to see it. Also, use tables, charts, and graphs as much as possible, especially in relation to data which you have, because they will help the audience to visualize the data itself. If you're using pictures, sounds, or videos, use good quality ones and embed them where possible so that you don't have to search onto YouTube or something in the middle of giving your presentation. Also, in relation to videos, make sure you don't use videos to say things that you can say yourself, because the audience will wonder why you are having somebody else tell them something that you can say rather than you just saying it yourself. So use videos very sparingly. They should be generally short videos and only make a specific point. Finally, make sure you check and edit your slides for mistakes and for possible improvements before giving your presentation. The audience will not really notice how wonderful your PPTs are, but they will notice the mistakes in your PPTs, and it will really damage your credibility as a speaker if you have lots of mistakes on your PPTs. Let's summarize. Now, there are many different kinds of speeches, but preparing for speeches really all follow the same steps. Start with the SPAM model: situation, purpose, audience, method. So think about those things before you actually start preparing the speech itself, because that is the environment around which you will be giving the speech. Decide on your specific thesis statement. What is going to be your topic and your controlling idea for your speech? Don't forget to brainstorm and research, particularly to find supporting points, but you can also brainstorm and research to decide on your narrower topic and your controlling idea. And remember to make sure that your topic and controlling idea are appropriate for the length of the speech that you're giving. In your introduction especially, but also throughout your speech, make sure that you're using hooks to get the audience's attention. In the introduction, do give some general background appropriate for the audience's level before the thesis statement, which should be the last part of your introduction. Construct body sections as you would write an academic paragraph, but use markers more and begin with the markers in order to tell the audience which part of the body sections you are on. Try to make use of as many stylistic devices as possible, which are good for speeches as well. Conclude by paraphrasing your thesis statement, paraphrasing some of your strongest points, and then end with some final thoughts. Select and prepare any tools that you want to use, And quite simply, practice, 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 making sure that you are using your body well for communication and that you're using your voice well for the communication. And that concludes today's lecture on giving good speeches. Thank you all for your attention, and I'll see you next time.